Hey guys, so we're going to be talking about civil rights today. I'm going to try and keep this as compact as I can because there are at least two other videos that you're going to need to watch for this to really understand what all is going to go on with this section of the course. Those are going to be Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, as well as Malcolm X's by any means necessary" speech. As well, your writing assignment is going to be over those two things as well. So let's jump into this, see if we can't get through it too quick without missing any important details, and see where it goes. So we're going to go all the way back and start in 1865 at the end of the Civil War. Now, why is this important? Because not everyone knew that the Civil War was over at the time. In fact, the last battle of the Civil War would take place in Texas long after the war had actually ended. It's one of the reasons that June 19th is a holiday in the state of Texas. So we have Juneteenth. That's the day that Texas found out that the Civil War had ended and that the slaves had been freed through the 13th Amendment. Now, of course, the 13th Amendment freeing the slaves would be the first. That would be shortly followed by the 14th and 15th Amendment, which would grant them citizenship and then give them the right to vote. So, right after that happened, there were a lot of black people that got into government. There were a lot of freed slaves that ended up becoming congressmen, amongst other things, in the state or in the states. And it didn't last long because of something else would come in called Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws were laws that were put into place, simply put, just to make things harder for African American communities, to make it harder for them to vote specifically, to make it harder for them to function in society. Amongst these laws, I'm going to read off a few of them for you, and you can think what you will. Okay, first off, segregation of schools, segregation of public accommodations, voting restrictions, segregated housing, interracial marriage, employment discrimination, transportation discrimination, social etiquette, and all these things weren't just enforced by law enforcement; they were enforced by regular people that thought it was okay to marginalize this group and to treat them poorly based off the color of their skin. Uh, and nothing was ever done, by the way, to really anybody that was involved in even lynchings and things early on in the states, because of Jim Crow laws and things like that. They would even give a writing test. The writing test was purposely made difficult to understand because if you couldn't get through it, you weren't allowed to vote. Now, the only precursor to that was that you only had to take it if no one in your family before you had the right to vote. So they made that date back before the end of the Civil War, before black people actually even had the option to vote, so that they could keep a lot of black people from being able to actually vote at all. Now, because of that kind of treatment, it shouldn't be a surprise that there are groups that were founded early on in our country's history to fight this kind of discrimination. The earliest of those is the NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. That was founded all the way back in 1909, and it focuses on combating racial discrimination, advocating for civil rights through legal challenges, lobbying, and public education. Now, even with those things coming about, there were some really bad things that happened early on in our country because of this kind of racism that was just prevalent after the Civil War for a while. In the 1920s, there was a place in Tulsa, Oklahoma called Black Wall Street. Some of you may have heard of this. If you haven't, don't worry too much. It really hasn't even been common knowledge up until the last couple of years. Even in Oklahoma, it wasn't in their textbooks until, I believe, around 2019. So, Black Wall Street was a booming town in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was primarily black businesses, and they were doing really well for themselves. There was a lot of this going on around the country at the time. But because of something that happened, a woman claimed that she'd been assaulted on an elevator, and they went out over the radio to tell people to go ransack Black Wall Street, essentially, to go attack Black Wall Street. Now, the good thing about them doing it that way is some people in Black Wall Street had time to arm themselves and put up a fight, although they weren't able to put up much of one because of what was coming for them. These communities descended on Black Wall Street, They flew airplanes over the tops of businesses and dropped turpentine bombs on them, catching buildings on fire and burning them to the ground. They were shooting people with machine guns. Over the course of that night, somewhere between 100 and 300 people were actually killed just in that one night there. And then it was essentially swept under the rug. They didn't call it a massacre, they called it a riot because even back then, riots weren't covered under insurance. So almost none of those people that lived in Black Wall Street had the funds or the abilities to rebuild once all this was over and done with. This happened over a summer where this thing happened across the country. It was called the Red Summer. Now, 1954, Brown v. the Board of Education overturns Plessy v. Ferguson. Plessy v. Ferguson stated that separate but equal was legal, and that was a Supreme Court ruling. Brown v. the Board of Education, however, had that changed. Brown v. the Board of Education, people now had the ability to go to school with people of different races. Prior, that was not the case, but it would raise tensions throughout the country. And in 1955, we would have something called, we would see a murder, the murder of Emmett Till. Now, Emmett Till was a young man, he was a teenager. He whistled at a girl at a grocery store, and she went home and told her husband that she was assaulted by him, amongst other things. And he and his brother-in-law found this boy in his uncle's house, dragged him out, beat him mercilessly, took him to a second location where other people were involved in this. They beat him to the point that his face was unrecognizable. Then they shot him. They tied a cotton gin fan to his neck, and they threw him in a river. His body wasn't found for 3 days. The only reason they were able to recognize this boy was because he was wearing one of his father's rings. Now, Till's mother had a funeral for him for 3 days, and it was open casket so that people could see what they had done to her son. Now, if this makes you upset, it should, and it gets more upsetting. While those men were tried for the crimes, they were both found innocent. And in the January after the trials, they were both on record in the news talking about how they had actually done it, making jokes and things like that about it. The woman admitted that she had lied about the assault on her, but none of those 3 people were ever imprisoned or ever actually had any charges stick on them. Okay? So, a year later, we're going to run into the Montgomery bus boycotts that went from 1955 to 1956, and this involves Rosa Parks. So Rosa Parks, another name that most of us know. Rosa Parks was arrested for not giving up her seat on a bus for a white person. Now, while this is significant to our history, while we do know her name, she was not the first black woman to do this. That was actually a woman by the name of Claudette Colvin. Now, why isn't Claudette Colvin the name of this movement? It's because Claudette was a young teenage African girl. She was pregnant, and she was unwed. And they decided that she wasn't really the right face for what they were trying to have done, right? And I know that might sound kind of weird, especially looking at it in hindsight. But the fact of the matter is, had that been the person that they tried to use for this story, it probably wouldn't have gone anywhere near as good as it did with the Rosa Parks story. So, all of this comes together, and we have the March on Washington, where over 250,000 people watch Martin Luther King give his I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C. And eventually all this together, all this pushing, would get the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, and ended segregation in public places. On paper, with a lot of these things, I kind of like to add that on paper, this is the way that it was supposed to be. It doesn't necessarily mean that people were going along with it, okay? But this was the start. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, that would pass just a year later, and it banned racial discrimination in voting practices and enabled greater voter registration amongst African Americans. They got rid of all of the loopholes and things that they made African Americans jump through just to be able to vote. Now, there are other cases that would change along the way. Loving v. Virginia. I think we talked about that in another video. But in Loving v. Virginia, a white man married a black woman in Washington, D.C., where it was legal. As they returned to Virginia, they're arrested and incarcerated. Once Loving v. Virginia went to the Supreme Court, that was overturned. They were free, and since that point, interracial marriage has been legal. Prior to this, it wasn't something you could do. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 that gets rid of housing discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, and addresses some aspects of segregation in housing. Now, this is something that's been over for a while now, but you can still see remnants of it. All white neighborhoods, all black neighborhoods, um, people still tended to stay where they were even after this was done, mainly because I don't think in 1968 people were ready to be that close to people that had treated them that way for that long. Now, the Voting Rights Act had to be reauthorized in 1982, and it extends protections for minority voters and addresses new forms of voter suppression because they didn't just stop doing it, they tried to get sneaky about it. It had to be done again in 1986, and this one was an Immigration Reform Act that provided a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants who entered the United States before 1982, strengthening enforcements against employers hiring undocumented workers. All right. Then we go to 1988, Civil Liberties Act. The U.S. government formally apologizes and provides reparations to Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II. Essentially, a lot of things have happened to a lot of different races of people in this country, and we kind of have a slow roll at trying to fix those things. Rodney King and the LA riots in 1992. If I have any students that are older, you may have even watched this on TV. Rodney King was recorded being beaten by several police officers. He was committing a crime at the time, but it was exaggerated force. They used way more force than it was necessary, and it was caught on tape, and it ended up causing a riot throughout all of LA that went on for days. Now, the Crime Bill of 1994. This was put up by Joe Biden. This bill was. It's the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. The bill contributed to mass incarceration and disproportionately impacted minority communities. Its long-term effects have been criticized for exacerbating racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Again, this may not have been the idea behind this law, but it's how that law was implemented to bring back uh, some of those times where minorities were treated differently than anybody else, right? Now, I want to get to something. Barack Obama was elected in 2008, and people started to scream at the end of racism and all kinds of stuff in 2008 when that went through. But the truth of the matter is, he wasn't the first black man elected to a higher position. That would be a man by the name of Hiram Rhodes Revels, who was a U.S. Senator from Mississippi, and he was elected in 1870. Joseph Rainey, a representative from South Carolina, also elected in 1870. Robert Smalls, elected in 1870. PBS Pinchback, the acting governor of Louisiana, in 1872. And then there's a huge jump, and we don't see another African American in a position of power like that until 1966. And that was Edward Brooks, who became a U.S. Senator in Massachusetts. Now, a big reason behind this, Jim Crow laws. As black people started winning elections, they started putting those roadblocks in the way to keep them from being able to vote. With a lot of the things that have been going on, we've seen some newer add-ons to some of these movements. One of them was the Black Lives Matter movement that started in 2013. It started because of George Zimmerman killing Trayvon Martin. Now, at first take, this was a case that a lot of people weren't really sure what to think on, but as time has gone by, it's pretty clear that Zimmerman was not justified in anything that he did. Uh, Not even because of that case specifically, but because of the way that he treated it once he was out of jail. He sold off the pistol that he used in the shooting. He's been picked up for other crimes with a firearm. He's painted himself killing Trayvon Martin and sold those. Um, those aren't the actions of somebody who did something that they didn't want to do, right? Uh, so that kind of started sparking back up this debate of what we're going through. Like, how are we supposed to feel like our communities are getting closer together whenever something like that is allowed to go on and go unpunished? Uh, Same-sex marriage and legalization, that one passed in 2015. That was Arbogethel Hodges. And again, it came through because of the 14th Amendment. And then we have several ongoing issues as well as civil rights. We still have issues uh, in the United States of the marginalization of minority groups, including African Americans. Um, we have a racial divide. We have a lot of public policy issues that push back and forth. Who are they going to hurt more? And we also have LGBTQ plus rights now as well. That is also considered a part of civil rights, which we're not going to get into today because of time. But this right here is just a short rundown on civil rights, and there will be more in your textbook. If you want to know more that I haven't talked about, you can contact me or look it up, and I'd be happy to help. All right, thanks, and I'll see you next time.